And this is Outnumbered. I'm Andrea Tanteros here today. Harris Faulkner, Sandra Smith, Jedediah Bila, and today's #OneLuckyGuy, Pete Hegseth, is back, and he is outnumbered. Welcome back.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Good to see you.
We're glad to have you today because you've run for office before.
In another life, yes.
And it's very exciting for Republicans. You ran as a Republican because we have fresh new poll numbers out that could point to a takeover of the Senate in just a few months.
So I didn't know that about you, by the way. I knew about your military background, but
it was brief but spirited.
It was your political.
Brief but spirited, yes.
Your political
That's how I like to put it.
Yeah, well, that's you.
We'll see.
You're spirited.
That's right.
So yeah, definitely.
Let's channel that spirit right now to those polls. Americans fed up and scared about the direction of the country, with President Obama taking the brunt of the souring mood as his approval rating dives to an all-time low in a new poll. Only 4 out of 10 Americans are okay with the job the president is doing, far from the 61% high near the start of his first term. And the approval rating for what used to be his strong point, foreign policy, pretty bleak. Only 36% approve of his handling of global affairs, another all-time low, a sign that the mounting global crises dominating the headlines may be taking a toll on how Americans view their president. Pete, I'm going to start with you. Chris Starrett was on America's Newsroom earlier this morning, and he called this a crisis of confidence. And I would point out that that head-to-head matchup between Democrats and Republicans, that number, in 2010, Democrats were doing a lot better than they're doing today, a sign that Republicans could perhaps sweep the Senate and, of course, retain the House.
Indeed. I mean, these top-line numbers are something Republicans are relying on in tough Senate races where you've got incumbent Democrats. Incumbents are always difficult to beat. You've got to have that top-line negative number, which has been above 50 for a long time. Now his approval rating is at an all-time low. If candidates can leverage that sentiment, the dysfunction in Washington, the president is signing a VA bill tomorrow, but he didn't do anything to pass that VA bill. People are seeing through what's happening in Washington. Things that get done are not because of him. Things that don't get done are usually stymied by him. I think the foreign policy numbers are most impactful. The comparison there was to May 2011. What happened in May 2011? The bin Laden raid. The foreign policy of this administration really had one success, and it was in May of 2011 with that raid. That's when it spiked, and it's been going down ever since.
And the pollsters who did this poll, Sandra, described the sentiments of the American people in 2 words: fed up.
Yeah.
And one of the things they pointed to is the economy.
They sure did.
Now, we have this poll right here. Take a look at this. A high of 56%. Well, this is right track, wrong track. So let's discuss this as well. But let's go to this one first, Sandra. Look at this. A high of 56% in 2009. Now it has dropped all the way down to a very low 31% or 42%.
That's right. And the poll also revealed that 76% of Americans lack confidence that their children's generation will have a better life than they currently do. So listen, confidence is low, and I'm going to pat myself on the back here for a second because Geraldo sat right where you are, Pete, on Monday and told me I was wrong that the economy would be at the forefront of the midterm elections. And let me tell you something, with the president's approval ratings where they are, with the sentiment that this new poll reveals on the economy, and by the way, that other poll you just showed, Andrea, was key as well. 71% of adults think that this country is on the wrong track. 7 out of 10 Americans directly blame the government for what they're feeling in the economy right now. So, Andrea, some very revealing things in this poll. Before I hand it over, 40% of Americans said that someone in their household over the past 5 years lost their job. So we are not seeing a robust economic recovery. In fact, people are still losing confidence in this economy.
And 49%, so almost half of respondents, Harris, still think we're in a recession.
Well, that's because it feels like it. You know, when you've lost your job, and I've said this before, and you have to catch up because you've built up all this new debt because you've been without work. And even with the offsetting benefits, it's not the same as having a job, right? And then all you can best do maybe is get less than what you had, because many of the jobs that have been replaced in this economy have come back with 2 or 3 people doing the old job in a part-time fashion. Now that allows companies to go around the cost of Obamacare, right, the Affordable Care Act, and get around that cost for having to give health care to everybody on staff. But it also allows them to keep their pay low in general, because it's a lot easier to cut your hours when you're less than 40. They can't miss you as much, and maybe work somebody else an extra half hour to cover or whatever. So it feels the same.
You know what I would tell Republicans? Watch these women voters, though. When you read into this, it shows that women favor a Democratic Congress 51% to 37%. That is a block that Republicans Republicans have lost repeatedly. I think what you learn from this when you look at this is that if people feel that you're on the wrong track, present solutions to them, present a vision to them so that they feel like you are the people who can get them on the right track.
Republicans doing
Republicans don't do that. They continuously lose this opportunity. Poor messaging.
And one of the biggest issues in this poll was the border. They cited the border and a failure to enforce our immigration laws, a huge opportunity for Republicans as they head home
so why
for the next 4 weeks in recess.
You and I have said it on the couch before. Let's take the president out of that issue. All you have left is the Hill. Why won't Republicans touch that issue?
I think they will. I do think they will in the next couple of weeks, without a doubt.
Interesting.
And prioritize the economy, of course.
All right, so some tough election issues there. And now there's this. 3 deadly insider attacks in Afghanistan, one of them killing an American 2-star general at a military academy near Kabul yesterday, all taking place within hours and rattling nerves with a U.S. troop withdrawal looming just 4 months away. Major General Harold Green, the highest-ranking American officer killed in a war zone since Vietnam, shot dead by a man linked to the Taliban, wearing an Afghan military uniform. Green's family and friends mourning his loss as his body heads home to the U.S. for burial. Meantime, Army investigators are trying to find out why he may have been targeted.
He wasn't engaged in combat. He was engaged there to help the Afghans, that would help with their future. So that's even more difficult to take. He wasn't there as an infantryman kicking in doors. He was there to actually help advance the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Security Forces.
His death and more recent Taliban attacks raising concerns over whether a security pact will be signed and if any U.S. troops should stay behind. And isn't that the key question here, Pete? Should we keep troops there after this main withdrawal?
Well, Iraq is a pretty good lesson of what happens when you go to zero, when you have no influence. So there's one part of it is the political leverage you have by being there. There's also the ability to train Iraqi security forces, which quickly crumbled because they weren't prepared. This Major General Green was a logistics trainer. He was a logistics officer who was charged with training the Afghan army about how to sustain themselves, because they know how to shoot, move, and communicate pretty well. But the long-term ability of an army to fight and sustain is its ability to feed its troops, project its troops. That's what this guy was trying to do. The Taliban is very insidious. They know what they're doing. They're a dedicated enemy. They want to erode the trust, which is exactly what this does. How do you continue to partner? And then they want to erode our will, which is already eroded in Afghanistan. And headlines like this do not do anything to help.
So if we don't keep troops there past this main withdrawal, are you suggesting then that Afghanistan could go by the way of Iraq?
Yes. I mean, I was a senior counterinsurgency instructor in 2011 and 2012 in Afghanistan, charged with studying the insurgency and the Taliban. The Taliban has a Maoist countryside insurgency strategy to control the countryside. City centers may be controlled by the government, but quietly at night, who really controls that territory? It's the Taliban saying the Americans may have the watches and timelines, but we've got all the time.
Wow, you said a mouthful there when you said Maoist, because that takes us right back to kind of the vision behind keeping troops in Vietnam. Because it was much the same thing once you got away from the big cities. It was, who knows who's really running things at that point. It's very tribal. You also said something, Sandra, that made my mind just kind of set afire. The highest ranking military leader killed in a war zone since Vietnam. I mean, that was such a huge loss. And it really does inform us about the potential, if we don't leave some kind of structure behind with our own military, how dangerous it's going to be for anybody left behind. Look at Iraq.
What's the goal? Yeah. But I have to ask, though, but keeping troops there for what kind of goal? I mean, I think it was completely naive to think that after the last decade we were somehow going to, in a country with deep-seated ethnic hatreds, a barbaric culture with Karzai as the poster boy, somehow go the way of democracy. They're never going to enforce the rule of law, civil liberties. It's in a culture that promotes wife-beating. I think it's a futile effort. I think that the minute that Osama bin Laden's terrorists slipped through the borders of Pakistan into Tora Bora, we should have said, if you continue to harbor terrorists, we will come back. We will just obliterate you. But until then, no democracy building, because that country is not suited for democracy, just like Iraq.
And from a political perspective, how do politicians navigate this? Because when you poll Americans, they repeatedly say, we want out. They don't even want these 9,800 soldiers kept there. They don't want any presence at all. So it's tough for a politician, Republican or Democrat, to advocate for more involvement or consistent involvement when people are saying, no, we don't want this.
That's a great point. Think about the candidates. In the first block, we talked about these poll numbers. The president's foreign policy numbers may be bad, but what Republican candidate out there wants to talk about staying in Afghanistan? The problem is you've got to narrow that mission.
Let me get this in real quick, if you will, Sandra, because I'm being told that a senior military official is telling Fox News that a flight because we're talking about this, with the remains of Major General Green, has now departed Bagram en route to Dover. We don't have details yet on this flight or any possible stops that it may make along the way, but this is just another point in our coverage of the loss of this high-ranking official in a war zone, the highest that we've lost since Vietnam, and now his remains on the way to Dover.
You know, Pete, I wanted to bring in an excerpt from your recent op-ed piece on FoxNews.com, if we can still put that up there, because it was very interesting and gave a lot of color based on your expertise and your experience. For the remainder of Obama's presidency, we can't expect coherence in dealing with foreign challenges. Instead, we should work to keep the free world from imploding before America can re-arrive on the scene. We should fight to ensure America keeps mowing the lawn. The seeds of international radicalism are exploding. We don't have time to wait for ideological pesticides or economic weed. Control we need to cut the grass down before it engulfs the entire lawn.
Yeah, mow the lawn is a phrase that was used about what's happening in Gaza with Hamas. You obviously want to be targeted, but when you've got so many radicals and so many insurgents rising up, you ultimately have to kill bad guys. Killing bad guys is part of your strategy. You're not going to nation build. You're not going to install democracy. We don't have a whole lot of friendly dictators in the region anymore.
No
but you've
question.
got the Islamic State taking over the Mosul Dam. You've got them taking over a city in Lebanon recently. I mean, they're expanding their reach. They fought the Lebanese army. This is a real movement of Islamists trying to establish a state. If we're not there, both helping our allies and killing bad guys, nobody else is. And that's going to keep growing. And my argument is it may be crude, it may be blunt, but you got to mow the lawn.
That answers Andrea's question of what is the goal now if you stay there?
Well, the goal of staying there is twofold. One, you train an army that's better than the Taliban and better than ISIS. You want a proxy force that can fight the forces of radicalism. And then you also need a projection platform. You need a small footprint from which special operators can go kill bad guys.
But that was never the mission. The mission was turn the Middle East into Philadelphia on the eve of the Constitutional Convention. And guess what? Paul Revere is nowhere in Tahrir Square or anywhere in the Middle East.
Hey, great to get your insight on that, Pete. Now, as the Ebola death toll rises in Africa, the Fed's taking new steps to keep the deadly virus from spreading here. What the CDC is doing to quarantine suspected patients. And there may be a new strain in the relationship between President Obama and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as the White House takes verbal shots at Israel over the civilian death toll in Gaza. So will the two leaders have to call a truce of their own? And Harris, don't get too excited, right after the show. From the couch on the web, join us for Outnumbered Overtime by logging on to foxnews.com/outnumbered and click on the Overtime tab. Tweet us your questions, comments, or tell us what topic you want to hear more about.
What hair product do you use, Pete?
I can't. I will reveal that in Outnumbered. Overtime.
Yeah.